So today we have Adarsh Williams for part 2, as promised. I enjoyed so much talking to him on the part 1, and I just really felt that we had enough information or enough just chat in us for a second podcast at least. So welcome, Adarsh, for number 2. Today we're kind of planning to make a little bit, I think the last one was a little bit, introducing you to Adarsh and his background and time in Mysore and how we got into yoga, the normal stuff. But this time we're going to talk a little bit more philosophically. And Adarsh was unusual as a guest because he gave me this fantastic list of different things to talk about. So if you're ever planning to come on the Keen on Yoga podcast, I do recommend that as a way to get on. Just give me a good list of topics and I'll definitely have you on rather than make them up myself. But today, so I'm just going to go through the list again. And you mentioned here, Adarsh, that you said Ashtanga was a suboptimal physical exercise, but an optimal mental exercise. No, I thought you'd start, and it's not an easy one to answer, but I thought I'd start you on that. It's a little bit confrontational.
Oh, sorry.
You said, yeah. No, that's good. That's exactly what I like. So,
Adam, I think this is an interesting idea that yoga is considered to be this physical exercise practice. And yoga was never meant to be a physical practice. It was meant to be a mental practice, right? It's a meditative practice. So for physical stuff, the traditional yogis would look to Ayurveda. So that would be the health and physical well-being practice. And then yoga would be a mental exercise. So I think something like Ashtanga is obviously amazing and has curative properties. But it in itself, I don't think is something that you should count on to fix your knee pain. It can help, certainly, but it would be similar if you were going to learn climbing, right? You're going to learn rock climbing. Yeah, rock climbing could definitely help your back. Maybe some of these moves and adding some of that functional movement to your life helps your back. But rock climbing in of itself, the goal is not to fix your back. The goal is to climb the rock. So something like Ashtanga to approach with an attitude that, yeah, this is a mental practice. This is my moving meditation that happens to have functional movement, especially if the teacher is embedding these concepts of functional movement, then it can definitely help. But that is in itself not the goal, not the intended outcome.
Absolutely. I think, unfortunately, it's just on a very basic level, it's kind of just replaced, what was it called, Reebok Step, and just
totally.
basic aerobic classes. Now it's yoga, which is kind of just a little bit. It's not novel anymore, but it definitely just. I think one reason is that because it's a led class, it's attractive to people because you're getting led through, and there's so many choices in life, and we're constantly having to make choices and have self-volition. That rather than going to a gym or doing one's own routine, it's much more pleasant, whatever the discipline is, to go to a class and get led through, by a teacher. So it's totally understandable why it's taken as a exercise regime, and also because it looks like it, especially with the vinyasa movement, it does resemble it. So that's sure. That is the danger.
Yoga has long been blended with this idea of fitness and fitness culture, and to your point, group fitness, group exercise. And I get that, and I think that's fine. And I just taught a class in my gym the other night and I loved it. And, these guys were super strong, bodies like iron. So it was great to bend them, and everyone felt safe and tight. It was great. Anyhow, it's been kind of mixed in with that circle, but I would say that yoga exists in its own little category, meditation, but then the meditators won't accept yoga in their category, so it becomes a bit of its own thing. And then Ashtanga is its own thing again. If you've ever taught in a yoga studio that has mixed styles, you realize that the styles have their own focal points, and Ashtanga is not necessarily same methodology as another style. You don't necessarily apply your yin yoga technique in Ashtanga. It's not always applicable.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of looking for different things where I would say, like, I take issue with the point that it was purely meditation, because I think that Krishnamacharya is very interested in the central channel. He's very interested in encouraging some experience of spinal stimulation. But then he was also giving exercises to the young boys to keep them, because it was boys in the Mysore Palace, we all know that now, to keep them kind of on the straight and narrow and keep them brahmacharya, as you know, give boys a lot of exercise. It kind of, helps take the focus away from other things. And, so I think there's a number of things going on. And then we're applying that now to an older body as an exercise regime. So it's like, it kind of like needs context. I think, it's a great tool, but it just needs to be contextualized a little bit. And also the movements are there for a different reason. I mean, they are meditative, but I think they're also trying to focus energy up and around the spinal channel to, in a tantric, cosmological sense.
Yes,
what do you
indeed.
think? Yeah.
Oh, I am right there with you. Now, this topic, I must admit, is usually something that I'm a little embarrassed about in a mixed group discussing, because you're absolutely right. These primary series postures, and then certainly the secondary, but just the primary asanas are very stimulating. And it's going to sound a little crass, but we'll say that the primary series makes you hungry and horny. And sorry about that, but that's absolutely true. And it generates so much energy there. And I think it's really important that yogis know how to channel that in a healthy way. And I think that's a lot of the self-work and, referring back to yamas and niyamas and just being an ethical person, being a good person, because these energies certainly do stir. So you've got to have some context.
I think that's perhaps the main downfall of modern yoga is not even the application of the yoga all the time, but it's simply that it's the lack of context. You just walk into a class, walk out of a class, and you're having the experience because it isn't just exercise. I mean, I never had the same experience at a mental, emotional level, energetic level that I, doing gym or whatever else I did, and I've done all kinds of physical stuff than you do with yoga.
It's not baked in. And in yoga, it really is baked in. And especially to your point, Krishnamacharya's style, his early style, let's say, had so much of that baked in. It's very potent for that.
And I think, if we come back to your terminology, the way you say suboptimal, I think if we say suboptimal, it would be the main problem I see with the series is generally the Lotus work. That there's this preponderance of Lotus work. So say, well, it makes no sense to look at it as a physical exercise because why all this Lotus stuff? Like no other form of physical exercise has all this Lotus stuff. So we have to then question, what is all this Lotus stuff for? And the point comes back to the Kundalini, the base of the spine, and stimulating that kind of energy that's residing there. All this Lotus work, focusing on that. But then it's like, how to give that context and how to apply that safely. If we're saying suboptimal, it's suboptimal because people just don't have those kind of hip opening and doing those Lotus things. That Lotus work doesn't necessarily give it. And this is always the bee in my bonnet that people think, well, if I just sit there with my leg up. So leg up on the thigh and hope for the best, and maybe a teacher will come and push my leg down a bit. Then I will open my hip, but I don't see it generally working out like that. I kind of feel that they need other more easy hip openers, more other simpler ways of opening the hip, and assuming it comes from there.
That's right. If you discuss with your physiotherapist this amount of rotation, abduction, knee flexion, right, all of those joint movements is beyond normal range of motion. So if you're just checking your chart, range of motion chart, you're going to see that is off the chart. That's beyond. Okay, so it's now not functional anymore because it's gone into this whole other level, let's say elite level. And I don't mean this as a hierarchy. I just mean that that's extreme. And some people are going to, by their nature, be able to do that, right? I happen to be, let's say, blessed that way with the Lotus position. Now, contrary, my internal rotation will be limited. And this is pretty common, right? You tend to go one way more than the other. So another person might say, well, in Ashtanga, they require this internal hip rotation, or it's going to put pressure on your knee because, it's not available. So these things are going to change per body. And for a lot of my students, I need to adapt that Lotus movement or the internal hip movement in order to make it suitable for them. So what do? We do a lot of Hawaiian squats. Are you familiar with that? It's basically a figure four, but you squat down and use the wall to get a bit of feedback. It's just an easy hip opener. And we'll sub those movements for the Lotus. And the idea is that, you can progress toward the Lotus, but this progression takes time. It may take lifetimes. And that's totally fine, but at least we can do something that's meaningful for the hip external rotation.
And do you incorporate that you mentioned in the practice? It sounds like,
Yeah,
is that
of
right?
course.
Right. So,
Yeah,
so
that is the position. The position, we'll go ahead and call it Ardha Baddha Padma Paschimottanasana. We'll give it that Sanskrit code name or archetype. However, it is going to look different on different bodies. Similar to your clothing will look different on different body types. So we need to adapt to individuals, which, by the way, is not just person to person, it's also day to day. New moon, full moon, it's cold outside, it's warm outside. All of these things are going to affect us. What was your sleep like? Are you hydrated? All of these things are going to affect the individual day to day. That's the beauty of a daily practice. You pick that up day to day.
That's so good. Gosh, it sounds like you're reading off the script. That's so good. It just comes so nicely.
This is like the daily. These are the daily mantras.
So clearly, yeah. So
Adam,
clearly
I talk to people. I talk to people every day, and I love it.
Yeah,
and I am faced
the
with
clothes metaphor. I love that as well.
Yeah. And I'm faced with these, these are very real issues that students have, and they feel mentally as well as physically confronted. And I definitely need to make sure that I'm able to help them to contextualize what's happening, what those changes are. Progress is something that takes time. I know I've experienced that. So it's something that doesn't come all at once. Sometimes you have those aha moments, but often it's small incremental stages. So I'm there for that. As a teacher, I'm holding space. I think when I'm doing my job, I kind of blend into the wallpaper, and the kind of Mysore machine is doing its magic. So and then you give little tips here and there, and you try to help and encourage and remind them that, this is a process. It's a long process. That is the yoga.
I kind of just wish sometimes that the series weren't set up in a kind of linear manner. So they seem 1, 2, 3, and you have this kind of going, so it encourages people rather to have the experience of feeling their bodies, which you very nicely explained there. They're feeling the action of the flexion and the abduction in other postures. Then there's this sense, well, I've got to complete that posture, and I've got to complete that posture to do the next and the next, and there's a completely different focus, which is somewhat.
Teachers are much stricter nowadays than I think some of the old school teachers who we've talked about, we've admired. Those teachers tend to be a lot more flexible. I personally saw Pattabhi Jois adapting postures and sequences constantly. Really, it was not an exception. It was really normal. I think it became much more standardized with more students coming. It's just a lot easier to kind of filter people through. You can't always attend to one student when you got so many. If you got hundreds of students there, it's hard to adapt everyone's practice. But I personally saw Pattabhi Jois adapt people's practice who were doing second series, who probably could not do the first series, couldn't do Marichyasana B, but he had them doing these basic postures, just like your physio would, to strengthen those body lines. Yeah. So, I've always, sort of adopted that model, but I was someone who had a clinical background before I came to yoga. So for me, this was never separate, and I never felt non-traditional because I taught my students based on their physical ability or inability. And by the way, I scale it right up. I know how to make it super hard for someone, and I'll have them do all kinds of crazy shit because I want them to also touch their potential and try to feel what those edges are. So I know how to scale it up for someone and make it super hard, and I know how to scale it down for someone to make it suitable.
Well, what kind of qualifications or kind of how would I say, tools would you use to ascertain and do that? Is there anything you could say, a framework of how you kind of use the practice in terms of level and seeing gradiencies and things like that?
Well, as a teacher, I try to give my students, everyone, just a framework. I try to make movement very simple. There's just a few principles really that your physiotherapist would understand. The first is around spinal bracing. In yoga language, we call it a bandha. But if someone knows how to stabilize their spine properly, then they're going to be pretty safe overall. And then through this concept called irradiation, we know that that strength radiates. Well, it goes both directions. It can radiate from the core to the sleeve, but it can also radiate or irradiate from your fist back to your center. But these are very simple principles. I teach it with the breath. So inhale is increase, exhale is decrease of tension. And then it extends to the shoulders and the hips. They understand the rules of rotation, that when my hip flexes, it turns out. When my hip extends, it rotates in. That is consistent through every single movement you can do, whether it's yoga or gym or parkour. This is the dharma of movement. And once people understand these concepts, once they have that down, then okay, you get to practice it every day. Inhale, exhale, and so on. And here's our formal posture sequence. We call it Ashtanga. This is our formal practice. I think it's really great. It's not perfect, but the imperfect practice that you do consistently will be transformational. So it's just my little sandbox that I like to play in, but it's certainly not the only way. And not everyone's going to resonate with it. And that's totally fine. But as a teacher, I try to bring people in. I try to make them, have a feeling that they enjoy it, that it's fun, that it is rational, Why are we doing this? Well, because it's there. It's like when you climb Everest, it's there. So that's why we do the Lotus. That's why we do the foot behind the head. It's there. Not for everyone, not in this lifetime, but for some, yeah, let's do it. And for others, pigeon.
That's good. And you mentioned the Bandha, actually. And here also in your little list to me, you say you learned Bandha from Pilates rather than Ashtanga. Do you want to elaborate on what your feeling of Bandha is? Because we hear this word banded around all the time.
Yeah, totally. And first I should give my disclaimer because, Adam, as you know, Bandha is certainly associated with your Kundalini. It's related to your awakening of the vital energy and all of this. So Bandha is something very subtle, and it's something that through your meditative experience, I think awakens, right? So that is Bandha. However, and that's kind of the yoga world understanding of Bandha, the esoteric anatomy. But for me as a student, I was always challenged that I couldn't quite understand the anatomy of it. So I was very lucky. I took these Pilates teacher training from this real master Pilates teacher, and he had this great anatomical model with 4 muscles. And it was the transversus abdominis, and he taught me that TVA muscle was the one that when you isometrically held that muscle, that it caused these other 3, your diaphragm, pelvic floor, and your spine muscles to co-contract. So that co-contraction, in Pilates, they call us the powerhouse. But that co-contraction is the same thing that we're doing with our Bandha system in Ashtanga, which is different than the Bandha as a Kriya exercise, right? So there's a difference in the methodology. Uddiyana Bandha in a Kriya is a hollowing of the belly, but in Ashtanga, it's not a hollowing, it's a stiffening, it's a tightening in place. And as I mentioned earlier, that then stabilizes the spine. At its physiological level, it's going to help you in your chaturanga because everything is tight and right. But for your Kundalini arousal, it's going to help you to awaken and stimulate. The posture of meditation is perfect straight spine. It is not some slouched over, tired monk. No offense, but some of those guys not meditating.
How would you relate the idea of Bandha, which you've described perfectly, to my mind? How would you relate that to the diaphragm and the action of the breathing? How does it relate to?
So the diaphragm movement is a little different. So when we're belly breathing, like when I was in India, I used to enjoy going for the shave. Did you ever do this, the 10 rupee shave?
Oh, yeah.
That was one of my kind of guilty pleasures. That was my man time. So I used to love going for the shave. But the first time I went, I had a big beard, much more fluffy and hippie style at the time. But I remember going in and my buddy had convinced me to go for a shave. And I went in there and he just gave me the advice, man, you just got to relax and release into it. Breathe into your belly. So I did it. I went in there and I was breathing into my belly. And we're breathing in our belly like they tell you in yoga. your diaphragm is getting a full movement, right? So you're getting 100%, theoretically, 100% of your breath capacity through the diaphragm. When we're doing Ashtanga or you're fitnessing, if you're setting up for your deadlift, if you're doing your yoga postures dynamically, then that bandha, that isometric engagement of your abdomen, means the diaphragm doesn't move all the way into your belly. It doesn't move into your belly, it moves into your side and then into the back of the heart. So they call posterior lateral breathing. So the diaphragm movement, instead of going up and down, is going, let's say, three-dimensionally. That will limit your breath capacity a little bit. So the CrossFit coach told me that it's going to decrease by about 10% of your breath capacity. But you know what? That's totally fine. I don't know about you, but most people don't breathe very well anyway. So I'm okay with them losing a little of their total capacity if they're also optimizing position because they have a stable trunk. 90% breath capacity through their diaphragmatic ujjayi, right? That's the Ashtanga technique. And I think that's applicable to any of your gym workouts, anything. I think it's going to make you better.
Mm. I always thought the diaphragm was, kind of easy to understand. And recently I was reading Leslie Kaminoff's book on yoga anatomy, and he talks about the different ways that actually you could choose to breathe. You're using the diaphragm regardless. You could choose to breathe into the stomach and the belly, because people often mention this in workshops and stuff like that. Or you could breathe, as you mentioned, more kind of laterally into the ribs and expand the chest and breathe higher. So you can almost kind of using the diaphragm, you can direct the breath to different places. And I just wonder kind of how.
And he's got a great. Sorry, please.
No, I was just going to say, I wonder how that would affect. I wonder why, because in Ashtanga you're generally trying to kind of expand the rib cage and not breathe into the belly specifically, not freeze the stomach, but certainly I wouldn't say it's a belly breathing we're doing there. But why would it be better to breathe in the upper body? I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, really.
So it has to do with again, the spine stability. It has to do with a pressurized system. So this is called intra-abdominal pressure. And this is a real thing, but it's really the bandha. It's the physiology of the bandha. So when we're engaging, again, those transverse abdominis, you're creating a tightening, a stiffening effect in the body. And this is a good thing. So for many of the things you want to do in yoga, including these big stretches, if you want to do back bends and stuff like that, you actually need tension in your body. You don't want to be all loose and floppy and all of that, because you're going to tend to bend a lot into certain places and not at all into others. You ever seen people on the internet doing back bends and it's just like bending in one part of their back and their shoulders are tight? That is no bueno, because that person is then putting all this tension repeatedly on one joint. Again, it's not a global system, a global structure. So that's what you're trying to do with this type of posterior lateral breathing. This is important if you're doing yoga, gym, Pilates, handstands, so forth. You want to engage like this. But if you're relaxing, if you're Netflix and chilling, or you're meditating in many cases, then you want to bring that tension all the way down. You want to totally relax. If you've done yoga nidra, if you've had a guided shavasana, I know we don't call it shavasana ashtanga, but everybody else calls it shavasana, that pose, well, that's belly breathing. And so this is a down regulation of the system. If you've ever done any of Jill Miller's yoga tune-up ball, she'll do like the, that big purple ball, the gut smash and the belly smash. That stuff's fantastic and will help you belly breathe. And we know that this is going to stimulate the vagus nerve, and that's that down regulation, that parasympathetic response. But if you're doing Ashtanga postures, if you're doing your handstand, you want to turn that tension up. And this is sympathetic. It's called eustress. There's distress, which means you're panicking. And then there's eustress, which means you got it. It's hard. You might fall on your face, but you got it. And this is a very good thing for the human animal. We need this healthy stress.
Yeah. I think I heard it said recently something like keeping the proximal part of the body, so like the trunk and the core, tight, and the distal parts, the limbs, soft and relaxed.
To some degree. You also don't want to have the floppy hands, the dead fish handshake. You also don't want to have that. So I think I was just looking at this with these karate hand positions. There should be some structure. This is one of my pet peeves in teaching, when I see people with the loose hands in their warrior pose. Always bothers me.
Who's Joe Miller, by the way?
Oh, Joe
That,
Miller is
yeah,
yoga tune-up. If you've seen these yoga tune-up balls,
no,
people
no.
rolling out on the massage balls.
I have to
Yeah,
get onto
and
her.
oh,
I
she's
like that.
fantastic. She's such a good thinker about fascia and movement and so forth. But all of these sort of self-myofascial release balls are sort of out of the Joe Miller world.
Okay, I'll get onto
Yeah.
her. See if she'll talk
Mm.
to me. What
Oh
about
yeah.
this one? I was looking through other questions you've got here. What about? I'm intrigued by the recency bias. Now, this is great, actually. I'm interviewing you with your own questions. Why is
Yeah.
it better to be a new teacher, you say, than an old teacher? No, why it is better to be a new teacher rather than an old teacher. What about that?
Yeah.
What?
Well, I think this works in a couple of ways. When I remember, just for me, when I first started teaching, I didn't have very much experience or knowledge, but I had a lot of enthusiasm.
Mm,
And I
mm.
remember people coming to the classes would really respond to that. And we kind of grew together. Maybe you had a similar experience. My students were getting better. I was becoming a better teacher. We'd solve problems. I remember so clearly when I needed to solve chaturanga, and it was because people were having trouble with it, and I could do it, but why couldn't they do it? And I just remember sort of talking through these things, trial and error, just in my own practice. Going through these kind of cues, these 4-step setups for doing chaturanga and so forth, and that was really great. I think there's some other things too. I'm a bit tongue in cheek with that because sometimes in Ashtanga world, we see how new teachers are elevated, like, oh, my teacher was in India, blah, blah, blah. And that's great. But what about these old teachers that are now long ago forgotten that you had mentioned to me? People won't
I
even
know.
necessarily hear of them
Yeah,
because
they
maybe
don't
they
even
aren't
know
on
the
the
old teachers
internet.
anymore. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and maybe if they aren't so involved on the internet and they don't have such a public profile, they'll be forgotten to history. And that's a shame as well. Especially in Ashtanga, we have this thing with parampara, and of course, there's the lineage of parampara, but there are the many voices and the many old teachers who were just out there quietly teaching in their area and building a community that has now become this global Ashtanga family. So Parampara is not only this family in India, but it's this larger family, is that whole sort of Parampara.
Yeah, if I got any usage for that word, I would definitely only use it
Mm.
along the lines of a community of people that because
Mm.
there is this whole history, and when I
Yeah.
tried to write this book on the Ashtanga history, actually, it started getting me in too much trouble with different different people, and then
Oh.
then there's different conflicting ideas, and there's a lot of history there, but I wanted to kind of share some of the history because I think it's motivating. I think it's nice to
Mhm.
hear. We all like hearing the old stories, and it
Yeah.
gives a context, and it gives, as you mentioned before, the fact that there was more variety and leeway, and perhaps even joy in the earlier iterations of practice in Mysore with Patabi
All
Joy
these hippies
sharing.
doing yoga together.
Yeah,
Oh,
they were,
come on.
sharing stuff and trying different things in Hawaii, blah blah blah. So
So
it's
true.
nice to hear. It's nice to hear
It
the
was
story.
it was never orthodox, right? The orthodoxy
Yeah,
thing is really quite new, and I do think it's just because of big masses of people. You're going to see this in any nationalism or religious sort of orthodoxy. People, the new guys. It's always the new guys who become much more. I remember when my father had quit cigarette smoking, and he hated smokers after that. Right? He was the new guy. Now that I don't smoke, I hate smokers, and I'm super judgmental. Same thing. Once you've converted over to Ashtanga, these other yogis, these flow yogis, right? And that's a typical new guy response. Where the old guys, I think, are a lot more easygoing with that stuff. Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
I bet you even Shroud is way more easygoing than you realize.
Yeah, I mean, I think people always assume that I'm, beating up on Meister or Sharap, but I always say I'm not. I've
Mhm.
seen him vary things, and I've seen him be open and adaptive to the practice. But I think it's logistics, as we've said before. I think he's in a
Yeah.
difficult position with loads and loads of people, and a lot of it's just logistics. And in fact, a lot of the harshest and most rigid and unhelpful iterations and uh, uh, presentations of Ashtanga are happening at home when people go home from Mysore and they're taking it in a more in a much more homogenous manner than it ever was done in India. So it's
exactly.
we are as maybe
But,
more to blame than.
I think conversations like this help to expand this for people who maybe are going home and, they'll maybe have some of these ideas that are a little bit outside of that group think. So I think, these conversations you're having are really helpful for this to move forward. So, have faith that, the next generation of Ashtanga is going to be much more open-minded. It's a fine balance. We don't want people just experimenting because then it does become something new, right? But I think it's good for people in their practice to go home and really work with it, wrestle with it, be willing to try things here and there for sure. But at the same time, they should be cautious not to get too far afield because then they invented rocket yoga. No offense. Love rocket. Much respect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's good to expand these kind of conversations and have different voices on it, and that's exactly why I got into the podcast in the first place. I mean, now there's probably a price on my head in Mysore. I'm never dare to go to Mysore without a whole security team around me. With the fundamentalists. No, I'm joking.
I didn't realize you were on the outs.
Oh well, I'm not. I don't know, but I'm still on the list. So so far, so good. But
Gotcha.
I think there's a lot of people that don't like these kind of conversations. But there's enough people that do. So that's the way it goes, isn't it? You can't please everyone all the time.
My sense is that more people actually appreciate a broad-minded approach. People love Ashtanga and love the tradition. And as you said before, love these stories and love that connection to something that
a lot of
it feels like it's got something behind it. It's not just something that I came up with, in my garage and now I'm teaching you and giving it a brand, trademark, and a .com. It's something that actually has an old history, maybe some mythical stories that we've made up about it, which is also great. It's like a legend, right?
Exactly. That's it. We trade in myth. I think that a lot of the way that we relate to the world is more emotional. And then therefore based on myth, and it is rational. So, to come back to your point as a young teacher and how enthusiastic you were and how you learnt together. That's exactly all I was doing. I didn't have a clue anatomically or about anything to do with Ashtanga. I just did the practice with the students, as you often did at the time, but I practiced along with them in the class, did it with them, and just, used to kind of tell them about the community of Mysore and tell them, these Ashtanga myths, and we loved it, and super motivating for people. I never was a full-on adjuster, so I never really hurt anyone as far as I know. I never pushed people into postures, I was just showing them mainly the posture and say, I'll have a go. But I wasn't so smart as you to develop it and say, well, how can you solve chaturanga? It was just like let's do as much as we can and see what you can do, try and do chaturanga. I suppose what I want...
Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, what I want to say is that, and for young teachers, even if you don't know what you're doing, there's a lot to be said. Just simply, obviously one should learn, and I probably should have learned a little bit more what I was actually doing earlier on. But there's a lot to be said for simple enthusiasm, encouragement, enthusiasm, and this idea of community. I like the history of Mysore and the whole stories about how it was, and all this stuff is very motivating. And because I think ultimately that's where we need to be taught or need to be encouraged. Not necessarily the level of what's your serratus doing here and blah blah blah. That's helpful as well, but greatly the mind is the main thing to encourage someone consistently to do something which is not easy. And do it on a consistent basis.
People will ask me, what can I do for my practice? What's the most important thing I can do? And I always tell them consistency. Be consistent before you're heroic. You're not going to, go to that retreat, workshop, whatever, and make that huge breakthrough. You'll make that breakthrough little by little. You go on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, and by Thursday, wow, you're making progress. And that's it. Or you're making regress if that's what you need to do. But I think the idea of just doing something every day, whether it's Zen meditation, you're staring at the wall, or you're doing your downward dogs and Ashtanga, I think that repeated patterning, that's what's going to really condition your mind. It's going to transform you in a way that makes the most difference. Like whatever goal it is that you want out of yoga, physical, mental, spiritual, that consistency is what's going to get you there.
Yeah, I think that's the bedrock of any practice.
Yeah.
Anything done consistently, because the body and mind, through the senses, doesn't want to be consistent, because the senses pointing outwards just want you to do whatever you fancy, in combination with emotions and what the desires you make. Yeah, they want something new, something stimulating, to do different things, so anything which you have to say, okay, I've got a routine in my life now, and I'm going to somewhat resist a lot of these temptations and to do one thing more specific. Then, you're coming into the path of yoga, aren't you? You're coming into the path of yoga,
prioritize
discipline. That. Discipline, restraint.
You see people make better decisions in the evening because they know it will affect their next morning yoga practice. And even if we are just doing these like dumb downward dogs and whatever, doing those stupid downward dogs actually is crucial, because you're probably not going to have that drink or whatever thing that maybe, you won't stay up late because you have to get up in the morning and go do your yoga. And that is hugely powerful. And it doesn't need any mantra or Sanskrit. It doesn't need any meaning aspired to it, other than, wow, I got up early in the morning and that transformed my whole life.
Yeah. I think that's what makes a difference between doing the yoga, if you do it in the morning, and say getting up and painting, or getting up and doing, staring at a wall in Zen, because you're a little bit more responsible for your choices. If you're going to have to do something dynamic, then there's a lot of it. It really is just the resistance of not doing stuff that doesn't help you. And that's a lot of it. Just not having enough sleep, not staying up later, not having too much to drink, or maybe anything to drink, and whatever else goes with that, because those things are really what gets in their way. Once you take those, basic lifestyle choices.
Yoga is way easier than like getting up early and going to yoga. That is way easier than these lifestyle choices that you have to go out and drink. For example, you have to save money to buy the drink, so you have to work harder to earn that money. It's way harder, way more energy invested in doing that activity. So yoga is actually just like super easy. You just have to do these things less, which is actually harder anyway. So I think that yoga is much easier than we give it credit for. We complicate things unnecessarily, but that's what the human does.
It's a nice segue to one of your questions here on how to build a Mysore program. Then.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people struggle with this these days. And I think I'm to kind of preface it myself, because there's a sense that a lot has to be done. And you mentioned holding space. And I think somewhat kind of having a basic pragmatic expectations around this is actually the way, and obviously patience as well is maybe the most effective way to build it up, rather than coming in all guns blazing. I'm going to teach all my students to a certain level that, right? Like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you definitely can't start with trying to be a big shot. That's for sure. Most likely the Ashtanga people, like in the Mysore world, that are going over to India and doing their practice hardcore every day, look, they're going to be light years beyond the average student walking in off the street. So you don't need to come in like being a big shot. I think that a good teacher or coach or whatever, they're always going to model their physiology to the physiology of the person in front of them. So if an older lady's coming in, I'm definitely not going to try to look like Mr. Superstar. I'm going to try to model my physiology to meet her. Maybe I need to slump down a little bit to her eye level. Whatever it is, just try to be engaging where she is and how I can help that person. So I think for any teacher, the kind of 3 seeds of starting a Mysore program, look, you got to practice. We know that. Everyone knows that. Ashtanga, for whatever its ills are, it gets people practicing. So that is something. it's good to have that image of like a hero or something aspirational, whether that's an aspirational trip to India or teacher training or just trying to be a better version of yourself, whatever that is, something aspirational. And then the community. And look, you as the teacher, you as the Mysore program builder, what you're building is community. And you do that one person at a time. When that person comes, they're interested in yoga, you do your best to relate it to them, what their interests are, what their goals are. Not getting them to that aspiration that you have, because guess what? You desire to be an authorized level 3 teacher, these qualities. That person, they don't know anything about this. They're just interested. I heard yoga would be good. I read in a magazine that yoga would be good for me. So I, as a teacher, I always try to meet people where they are. Of course, you have people who come in who have a high potential. They're already teachers themselves. So yeah, meet them there. Great. Oh, you want to do better back bends? I can help you. So this is also part of just meeting people where they are. So that's what I think is really crucial. So for me, over the past 6 months, I've been building a Mysore program here in Groningen, the Netherlands. And this is a place with not a lot of Ashtanga history. I would say in the whole country, it's kind of new-ish here, which is for me very refreshing. I love being able to share that with people. I don't come in like a big shot, really. I just try to connect with people. I think about local partners. For example, the studio I teach at, I have so much respect for what they're doing, all their programs. I take their classes. I try to relate to everyone there. I relate to my students. I try to make it as easy as I can to get them over this obstacle. What the heck is Mysore? What? I got to do it by myself at 7 in the morning? So I do my best to send them emails. So I stay really in contact through email a lot or WhatsApp message and help them out. Like, hey, man, where are your trouble points? What are you not getting here? And I try to answer those questions and be really available for people and a lot of eye contact, a lot of smiles. Just do my best to make it as easy as possible to get over those barriers of entry. And there are many, many obstacles are there.
Sounds fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I found it really, I suppose, coming back from Mysore, and you were in Mysore as well, and then, you get blinkered, you're surrounded by people of a high level, and one's interested oneself in progressing, and you have some aptitude, probably you're in Mysore for a period of time. So you become kind of blinded. And then the teaching, when you start teaching, especially again, as I say, like I was teaching before, and then you go to Mysore and you come back and you start, you have this rather strange perspective towards it for a while. And then the City of London, as I was teaching, with kind of bankers and 50-year-old guys, you start to think, well, if I teach this way, I'm not going to have any students. As much as I love Mysore myself, how can I make it applicable to like a normal person? So I think that was, it sounds like such an obvious thing to do, but I still feel that kind of that disconnect is there a lot of the time with
really
teachers'
is.
experience in Mysore and then teachers' experience going back and teaching normal people and just
You
being
are
kind
so
and
right.
caring and recognizing that the person just struggles to get on the mat, and they struggle because they come home from 6 or 7 and from a job, they've got kids to feed. I mean, it's just insane, and then they're there. I just kind of believe it that they're there in the morning and they tell me, sometimes, well, I got home at 7 and then it was late and then the kids had some emergency and then I didn't get them dinner on the table till, and it's just like, this is insane that you're here. You should not be here. In fact,
That is so funny.
Like,
I've told people the same thing. They have these extra sort of stresses because they're trying to get to the yoga class. It's like, what?
Don't. Just do a little bit at home.
Don't come to yoga. This is clearly not healthy. Yeah,
I know. So
it's funny.
I'm just amazed at what people are doing, whatever they're doing, and just they're my favorite students now. So we were talking before. They're they're not the people who I'm helping in advanced series. Although it's like I like those things as well. It's like like a dad who goes down to the basement and gets the old records out. I like all the advanced stuff because it's what I did, when I was younger. But I really like teaching.
It's easy
people.
to teach a stud athlete. If this former gymnast is coming in, then it's pretty easy to teach them all these poses
it's bloody
they
impossible
can do.
to teach them, to be honest, mate. Because they've done it in Mysore and they're doing it, but they're doing it, not in a sustainable way. And so it's almost impossible to get through to a lot of people once they've got to that perceived level. And it's like, well, it's like speaking a language, right? If you can get by in French or by in Dutch, why would you then bother to relearn it and learn it
Mm.
grammatically? Do you know what I mean? Because it works enough
Good
to
analogy.
get you what you want, right? Like, so why would you bother when someone's saying to you, well, actually, no, it's not grammatically correct, and you want to look at this or that? Now, it's like, well, who cares? Like, you can understand me, so like, we're having fun here.
That's
So
that's when the injury strikes, and you're like, wait a
well,
minute,
yeah, and then
I
they
got to
come
do
back.
this better. So that's the
Sometimes
silver
they come
lining,
back and
right?
they go, no, like, well, you were saying something, and then what were you saying then again? Like a couple of years later, well, yeah, I want to hear from that now. I say, okay.
Yeah, it is interesting to teach someone at that sort of intermediate level of understanding where, yeah, they have some knowledge, but they also need that refinement, that help. I think a lot about how to reach those people. It can be quite touch and go, because as soon as you want to intervene, then they have that resistance. Go
Yeah, we know
away,
it
give you the
well.
go
Yeah,
away
yeah,
vibe.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I've had
yeah.
people just kind of recite to me their resume as I'm giving them a tip. It's like, I've done this, this, and this training. It's like, well,
Oh, God. Yeah.
never mind.
The
But
thing is, the
yeah,
thing is, I understand it because I was one of those people as well. I remember going to
uh,
Hamish, and in London, I was like, get lost, like I just want to come here and practice and do my thing, which is a terrible attitude to have. But I had it as well.
yeah.
I just want to come here, use the space, and be helped to what I want to be helped with, and
Give me
you
a
know,
push. Yeah,
yeah. It's
interesting.
often not until you get injured or you get older and stuff that you have the
Yeah,
openness, and it makes it all so much more interesting, to be honest. When you
yeah,
for anyone listening, when you're feeling like you're in a bit of a rut and you just feel like you're pushing the same stuff every day, when not wishing an injury on anyone or wishing anyone to necessarily get older, because that's it's all nice being young and stuff, but nevertheless, it does make it a lot more interesting once you are able to expand from that box of just linear progress. Now what? Now what? Now what?
yeah,
To expanding into other areas of listening and sensitivity, and what does this mean, and how is the breath structured, like we've been talking, Adarsh, with the breathing and the diaphragm. And I wanted actually, as I wrap the conversation up, to go back to that thing about the breath, and
mm,
you mentioned here, I like this. Forget being vegan or paleo. The best nutrition is the breath. And been reading
yeah.
this new book on breath by Patrick McEwen.
Oh yeah,
Heard of that? The Oxygen Advantage. And well, it has some interesting things to say. I think that it's becoming more common knowledge now. That, and I'm sure you and I can hear from what you've been saying, you're well versed in all this stuff. The idea that the oxygen is not, we're generally not oxygen hungry. It's generally that the need is often for more carbon dioxide and keeping the carbon dioxide longer in the bloodstream. So when you were talking about not having enough breath or more breath, do you want to say something more about what you would say is a more optimal breath, which is not necessarily
yeah.
about taking oxygen in, perhaps?
Right. No, I
Mm.
do think that's quite interesting. I heard him interviewed. I haven't read his book, but I heard him interviewed on a
Trying to
podcast,
get
and
him on. Yeah, I'm trying to get him on.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
No, I think that would be great to relate it back to Ashtanga, so I think that's a great concept. How I think about breath nutrition, that's something that came to me more through this idea. First, of movement nutrition. So this is a Katie Bowman term, and I think that's her book. Maybe is nutritious movement, but we talk a lot about the diet that we should have, and obviously this is important, but we'll often put so much importance that we don't look at other areas. So, example, movement nutrition. We know we need to walk a certain amount. It's not for the physical exercise part. It's probably more just through the circulation of lymph, the circulation of oxygen to the different parts of the body. So walking is crucial. That's movement nutrition. Yoga, I think, is movement nutrition. So it adds so much to us without even thinking of the vital life force, but just the kind of gross physical body. It adds so much. It's so important to do this movement practice, this movement nutrition. And then the same thing with breathing. Forget about the subtleties of breath, like the diaphragm or the sound or
Mm.
anything like that. If you listen to people as a yoga teacher, you listen to people, but people breathe poorly. People have terrible posture overall in life, and people have terrible breath. People have bad breath. So they breathe very restricted. They are not properly, inhaling or exhaling ever. And then, of course, that has a huge effect on the nervous system. So they're very stressed out, and it's a problem. It's a vicious cycle. So I think that one of the invitations of Ashtanga is that you really consciously pay attention to your movement nutrition, and you have those check marks like you were discussing earlier. got to do this hip rotation this way and that way and extension and so forth. So those are movement check marks. And then you have breath check marks as well. And this is something that I know I pay attention to first thing in the morning. I'm doing things related to my breath, and I'll go through these Kriya exercises to make sure I'm cleansing my system. But I'll notice people come into the yoga class and their sinus is really blocked, like they have allergies. I think this is a problem, right? But there's very simple things in yoga that we should pay attention to immediately. It's just like brushing your teeth. It's really like hygiene. And so these types of, let's call them hygienes, these kriyas should be done. The breath and all of this needs to be cleansed. And you might need to be doing these different neti cleanses and so forth. I don't know. You might just do a big farmer's hanky. I don't know what you're doing, but I know you need to like work it out. That much I know. So I see people really struggle with this. I hear that their breath is not full. I'll go into the sauna and people come in there and I think they're about to have a cardiac incident because their breath is like terrible, like a broken down truck. And so that makes me nervous. And what I realize is that most people walking around have terrible positions, their posture's terrible, and then their breath also is super limited. And then that person's worried about their vegan paleo diet. To me, it doesn't make any sense at all. I think that there's some obvious things they can clean up around their breathing and their movement that would make all this other stuff so much easier to eat well and so forth. So I see we have a lot of misplaced precision. We could focus on quite simple things, immediate things, rather than these big existential issues like my diet.
I think because it's easy to focus on those things, because when you focus on the simple things, you're going to come back to the self. And when you come back and we want it and we don't want it, and it's like a cat on a hot tin roof. The fundamental thing we're looking for is self-connection. The last thing we ever want is to come back through the breath, which is the easiest way to come back to self-connection. Because then there's all this stuff lying there, which is begging the question why we're breathing in this way in the first place, because there's this underlying unresolved emotions that are lying there. We could call them trauma, or for different degrees trauma, and it's constricting the breath. So the breath definitely gets you to touch on that if you are consistently aware of it. So I kind of feel that it's we kind of have this double-edged thing of wanting to get there and wanting to go back, and then also being afraid of being taken back there, by the breath, because I think it's almost unavoidable if you continuously pay attention to the breathing, at least in my experience, that you will be taken back into the place of your deeper being and everything that resides there. Have you seen this? How people
now, because they're teaching a lot of mindfulness in schools, but what they've seen is that children are actually having anxiety responses, anxiety attacks because of the mindfulness training
to breathing.
And I found this. I found this to be very interesting because, you hear about this in pranayama exercises and so on, that people will have these response, almost like a drug response, where they have a bad trip where, oh my God, now I am aware that I'm breathing. And because I'm aware that I'm breathing, I'm starting to go into this cycle. I'm starting to spin. And I found that to be very curious. And I've seen that, teaching breath work, I've seen people start to spin with these things. So it's quite interesting. And I think it's very important as the teacher that we can help guide people through that they're able to see that it's normal and to embrace it, right? To embrace that self-awareness.
They're too fast, too quickly, too fast. Yeah. And I think the thing with the Ashtanga is that, again, speaking from and extrapolating from personal experience, is that what you've got is all these movements. So it's easy to pin the breath, and coming back to a certain state when you've got all these movements to do, it acts like a buffer somehow, rather than just having the breath and nothing else. You've got a framework to contextualize your breath and the experience of breath. Because if you're just dumped with the breath, then you're just thrown in the deep end of self, let's say, with a bigger S. Mm-hmm. But if you've got this framework, I've got all this concentration and all the limbs to think about, it's like you've got a lot of stabilizing around the experience of being a little bit with yourself, but you're also very much within a framework of more worldly activity, let's say. There's a lot to support you around the endeavor, where there isn't if you're just dumped in meditation.
You nailed it. I think that's exactly right. And I think that's the reason that guys like us that might be a little Ashtanga skeptical, I think that that is why we love it and why we keep coming back to it. You see that there's this very formal structure. It's going to do these things that we see are super important around the physiology and so forth. Yeah, I mean, sitting in meditation, I think is like, a problem. I think that people sit there, but they're not like meditating. I think they're sitting there, they're daydreaming or they're sleeping or whatever, but it doesn't mean that the stuff is happening. I think that the ancients were very clever. They saw that meditation, that the mind was slippery. So they gave the mind something to do. They gave it breath, they gave it movement, they gave it the yoga postures, and it gave the mind something to focus on. By focusing on the body, by focusing on the breath, then the mind itself began to unfold, right? So the enlightenment experience began to unveil itself. That is the genius of yoga to me. And yeah, it's quite simple, but execution is not so simple.
Yeah, in theory, simple. In practice, not so much. Yeah, just to finish up here, you mentioned the enlightenment experience, and then one of your thoughts that you shared with me, you say,
Yeah.
forget Kundalini. What about Kundalini?
Oh, Kundalini.
And so, that was a funny one. I liked it. And I was thinking, and I was sitting
Thanks.
in we have an ice bath here currently where I am,
Oh,
and
you
I haven't
know
been,
about Kundalini.
you know what, the ice bath's like kryptonite, because when it's there, I have to do it. I have to do the ice
Yeah.
bath.
How
And
do
I
you
don't
how do you
like it.
feel? You do? Yeah. Do you like it
I do
after
it.
or do you like it during?
Oh no, I hate it, Joe. I hate it.
Uh,
I built up when I first started doing it. I could literally, I saw guys jumping in Bali, and I was there, and I
yeah,
just felt like a real wimp, like they were just jumping in like
I
these
know.
Australian guys, blokes, like just lying in there 10 minutes, they'd get out, I just dip my toe, like just jump around, and like so I just thought, I've got to master this. So in the end, I have built up, and I do 10 minutes now in the bath.
Yeah.
But I can't say I
Respect.
enjoy it. I can't say I enjoy
Yeah.
it. I hate it, but I think it's good for the body. I think it feels
So
like it's good for the body. What about you?
So perhaps this cognitive reframing is just what you need. So I had never lived in a colder climate until I moved to Northern Europe. So the last few years living here, I'm getting to experience just, longer sustained winter and so on, and dark and wet. So all of those things. And at first it was, challenging, I would say. I'm not one to complain about the weather so much, but just with things like yoga, it's kind of hard. You go down, it's like, geez, it's like 0 degrees. Now I got to stretch. So at first it was challenging, but the Dutch are a very cold adaptive country. It's really normal for people to take cold showers here, even before Wim Hof became famous and made the
Hmm.
cold plunge,
Forgot he's Dutch.
desirable.
Yeah.
The Dutch, it's kind of a cultural thing to take cold
Right.
showers and these polar bear plunges and stuff. I think throughout Scandinavia, they have a long history of this. So the first 2 years, I kind of struggled with the winter, but then something happened. It was the Kundalini. One day, it was maybe 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm on my bicycle. It's -5 degrees outside. It's snowing. Riding my bicycle to the yoga studio, and I just felt this sensation. How can I say it? At first, felt cold. The sensation of cold. But somehow that cold sensation began to permeate my body in such a way that the pain became pleasure. And the experience was transcending, and it just felt like, oh my God, how can I describe this but the Kundalini? And so now every time I experience that cold, I always just feel that ripple go through my body. That once was not comfortable is now quite familiar and quite comfortable. And it's crazy. I've become cold adapted. I'm now doing the Dutch cold shower and I don't do the ice bath, but I will do the ice plunge, and I go to the sauna and do the ice plunge afterwards, but I'm not doing the 10 minutes yet.
Yeah.
So I should build up.
I forgot that you were living in California, weren't you? In Encinitas in that area, right? That's where
So
you.
I'm used to and everywhere I've lived has been a warmer place. So this is my
Yeah,
first
yeah, yeah, yeah,
sustained
yeah. No, I
cold
mean,
climate.
like I lived in London for years, and I remember,
Yeah.
I remember when Teresa, my wife, was in Goa, and then she was complaining about it, whatever. And then I was getting up, cycling to the Mysore in the city of London, 40 minutes in the snow.
Yeah.
What are you complaining
Coldalini.
about? I know I don't mind that, but you try the cold bath is something else. The kind of,
Yeah.
I would say pain. I don't know. I don't want to say put
Sweet
people off
pain.
and say it's pain. Well, yeah, but
It is
I'd say
tapas.
it's
Tapas
intense.
is not just heat. Tapas
It's
is something that's uncomfortable, but
it's
we
an intense feeling.
transcend.
It's an
Yeah, and
intense feeling, and
we were
it is
mentioning
mental.
eustress
Yeah.
earlier. Putting yourself through something that's uncomfortable helps you to transcend that is uncomfortable. This is classic Viktor Frankl. If you read Man's Search for
Yeah.
Meaning,
Oh
you know,
yes,
we transcend. We reach a higher capacity through these things that are difficult. So that's classic yoga 101. That is tapas, and that's what you're doing. So the ice bath is cold tapas.
I do it for information, to be honest. My childhood was
Oh,
hard enough. I went through
yeah.
hard enough stuff. I don't need to put myself through anything more. Now I'm an adult. I don't want to suffer anymore. But I do it mainly, because I honestly believe in its curative properties. Like I have all little
Mm-hmm.
niggles and things, and I go in that, and it
Yeah.
really, honestly, I recommend it to anyone. I mean, maybe people also use it, and I'd say it's also very helpful for people if you were suffering from depression, I think, and
Yeah.
sometimes I'm anxious and I go in it
That was Wim
because I still
Hof's.
have anxiety. And
Yeah.
and I go in it and I'm completely relaxed afterwards. So yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
could see how it could work for that. But primarily,
Yeah.
I'd say I use it because I think it really does work for the body.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm with you, and I love that this is becoming much more common. It sounds like in Bali, there's a whole crew of ice
Oh yeah,
bathers,
there's
and
loads of that
yeah,
stuff happening there. Yeah.
it's really become a quite mainstream thing. I think that Wim Hof's done a great job with popularizing that and breath. So I love this, and I'm totally here for it. And the fact that we now have data that supports the efficacy of it, that people are actually improving either their mental well-being or their physiological well-being through the ice bath. Yeah, totally. Fantastic.
Yeah. So you just got to take that plunge now. Get the bath. I mean, even if you have a
I'll
little,
head over to the canal.
yeah,
I'll
that's
go
all
in
you
right
need.
now.
Honestly, don't have your death on my hands. You fall through a bit of ice or something.
Don't worry,
But
I'll
no.
do my breathing first, and
Oh
I'll
yeah,
be
you have to
set.
do the horse stance. You have to do the Wim Hof horse stance and start punching something. I don't do anything like that. And people say, "Oh, you need to do the breathing." Blah blah blah. Literally,
I
I
love
just
it. I got to
I just
meet Wim a few
get my
years
phone.
ago.
Did you? Wow,
I went to a
that would be
big
cool.
fitness expo
Yeah,
in Munich,
yeah,
Germany, and it was great because it was all like really like fitness professionals, people who are quite put
yeah.
together and
He's
have
really
their.
not like
And
that.
then
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah,
comes Wim,
yeah,
and
yeah. With his
by far the
guitar and
most
his shorts.
he
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, he's great. He's just this old Dutch
He's a
hippie, and
boss.
I know
Yeah, yeah,
tons of guys like
yeah, yeah.
this, and
Really. Ah,
I'm totally here for it, and I'm really impressed by what he's done. I'm even more impressed the fact that he can teach people. He's done such a great job with taking some of this old, yoga or Tibetan, whatever he's doing, and making it applicable for people and athletes. And yeah, I think it's really important what he's doing.
well, there's no easy way to end this, but we've done over an hour, so
Yeah.
people have probably tuned out long ago. But if you're still here, then
Nay.
thanks for listening, and I hope you
Yeah.
enjoyed it as much as we have, because I think we're quite friendly now, me and Adarsh, and I think we're going to
Yeah.
meet up sometime and have another chat, and maybe another one of these. Because
Absolutely.
yeah, I think we've really got a lot to say to each other. So thanks for coming on,
Yeah.
Adarsh. I
Thanks,
really
Adam.
super
I
appreciate
appreciate
it.
it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.